While remote patient monitoring has been around for a while, its adoption hasn't quite made it to the private practice world in a mass big way. What would it take to change that? Well, my guest today lives in this world, and he's going to tell us what he thinks it would take to make that happen. I'm Carl White, principal at Mark Advisory Group, which is a healthcare marketing agency, and I'm also the host of PracticeCare. The mission for both is the same, and that's to help private practice owners stay private. Not only is that what they usually want, but care is better when the provider owns the practice because that's when they're going to have the most freedom to make the clinical decisions they think are best for us. It's different when somebody else owns the practice. Usually their agenda starts to creep in. It's not unusual. It's not illogical. It's just that it's not always sometimes what the provider needs to best be dealing with. So let's just help them stay private and keep all that out to begin with. My guest today is Drew Meyer. Drew is the founder and CEO of Snow Cloud Ventures. Drew is a health tech entrepreneur with 25 years of diverse expertise spanning healthcare and technology. This experience enables Drew to assess the practicality of new solutions while offering thoughtful strategic advice and mentorship to founders and their teams. And Drew, this is a cool topic we're about to talk about, so thanks for taking some time to come on PracticeCare and tell us about it.
Thanks, Carl. Appreciate it.
Yeah. But before we get into it, I want to start where I start with every guest, which is the bio I just read was short. That's what I asked you for. So if you wouldn't mind filling in some of the gaps for us, tell us more about yourself, help us get to know you.
Sure. So deep down, I'm a tech person. I love technology. I started out as a programmer a long time ago, and eventually found my way into healthcare through med device.
Mm-hmm.
And I just really love being in healthcare and still continue to love being in healthcare because of the impact it has.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always sort of come at this from the side of not only do we want to find solutions that are great for patients, but also for the healthcare providers.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you have to have success in all parts of that.
Mm-hmm.
And then also keep the business in mind. There is a business part to this that helps with delivering better care,
Mm-hmm.
which is sort of that nasty thing that a lot of practitioners don't like to talk about. But it's an important part. So
Mm-hmm.
ended up in med device. I started a couple companies after that. One in they were direct primary care, which is where two of them were, and then the last one was a remote patient monitoring company. And we focused on how do we deliver whole service around RPM so
Okay.
that physicians didn't have to do any of the work, the heavy lifting. So we did all the heavy lifting.
Okay.
Loved remote patient monitoring, loved the work we've done. Now I've got my own company, Snow Cloud Ventures, and helping startups and any type of medical practices with the various things,
Okay.
including remote patient monitoring.
Got it. Okay. So perfect. A lot of experience there. Let's jump in and before we start talking about, getting it more private practice adoption, all the things I kind of teased, let's just start with some like basic definitions and what you see. So the basics of remote patient monitoring, just so that you and me and listeners, we're all thinking about it in a common way, for our discussion here. So what are the basics of it?
Yeah, I think there's a couple places to focus on. One is, so remote patient monitoring has to do with there's a device
Mm-hmm.
involved. And most people are going to think of something like a scale or a blood pressure cuff. It can also be software that is designated as a medical device. So that's
Mm-hmm.
a specific designation you have to get. You can't just say, oh, by the way, I have some software and I'm going to call it a medical device. But you really have to have something that's a device. And that device has to do certain things. It has to automatically transmit data.
Mm-hmm.
That's a requirement.
Mm-hmm.
So remote patient monitoring is the collection of that data
Mm-hmm.
and the monitoring of that data.
Mm-hmm.
And then there is clinical services around that. Now, with remote patient monitoring, there are some very specific things that have to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And it's number of days and the device has to automatically transmit and people have to spend a certain amount of time. And those are kind of the details around the codes associated through CMS, so
Mm-hmm.
the CPT codes. But one of the things that I think is important to know is what do we can monitor all kinds of stuff, and
This
people
is
are
a
used to
question I
that.
had, like, when did you see
Yeah,
proper
yeah.
uses, useful uses, I guess, versus kind of, you know,
It it's for chronic disease, and
okay.
and and some of that is clinical, some of that is business. So if you have a device, and let's say, when it comes to a device, these devices, they come in all shapes and form, but we always sort of said it's about $100 for a device. And there's things like cellular service that you have to pay for if it's cellular based. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So that's $3 a month or $2
Mm-hmm.
a month or whatever. And that adds up over time.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say it's $100 all in for a device
Mm-hmm.
for a year. That's a pretty big cost, actually, when you look at the revenue that comes in, or the reimbursements that come in.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to be able to spread that cost over a period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And really, you don't so the from an economic standpoint, when you put someone on a device, you want them to be on it for a longer period of time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not for really acute, it's for chronic. um, and there's kind of the big ones. So there's hypertension, diabetes, chronic kidney disease, congestive heart failure are kind of the big ones. And really,
Yeah.
hypertension has been dominating it. I think there's a lot more that can be done,
Mm-hmm.
but those are sort of the areas where this has really gotten momentum.
Got it. I worked for Baxter for a while, and yeah, the chronic kidney disease, home-based dialysis called peritoneal dialysis. So you do a lot of it at home, and you know, you're right. The hard part was that device and the software behind it. Yes, it is as regulated as that stent that is put into your heart. And but you got 5 million
Right.
lines of code or whatever, and every one of them, you can't just take a statistically significant sample of code and that passes there. Oh my God, it was just it's a it's a it's a mountain. I don't know how else to describe it, to like get that thing
It's
approved and
about,
keep it approved.
yep.
It's a mountain, and then yeah, and then it was a lot. It was a lot, but that's a chronic disease. You're absolutely right. I mean, that's years and years.
Yeah. And I think it's important. I think the software piece is important. And maybe we'll talk about that a little more later, because I don't think you can go anywhere in healthcare right now without talking about software in some way, shape,
Hmm.
or form.
Yeah,
It impacts just about everything.
yeah.
So um, certainly that's an area that there's going to be some more growth in the remote patient monitoring space.
And then you said hypertension is like a big one right now. Is that just for the obvious reasons it's sort of kind of growing as a clinical condition, and or what did you mean by that?
Yeah, so hypertension, it's just extremely like prevalent. I mean,
Hmm.
first of all, it's prevalent,
Hmm.
and there's very particular, it's easy to put a device on a person and say, okay, we're going to monitor your hypertension. That's very easy to do.
Hmm.
There aren't, not every chronic disease is easy to do that with. It's one that's easy to do. So if you look at this through a business lens, big market, because
Hmm.
there's lots of people with hypertension, and it's
Hmm.
very easy to say, okay, I'm looking at your blood pressure, and
Hmm.
it's very simple. The
Hmm.
devices are simple. They've been around forever. So
Hmm.
it's simple.
Hmm.
Now, is it the right way to go? That's another question from a
Hmm.
clinical standpoint. Is it really impacting? But it's certainly the kind of the biggest
Got
part.
it. Got it.
Yeah.
So what are you seeing that's new and that's like you find exciting in this world?
So yeah, I thought about this one a little bit, and
Hmm.
I have to go back. I have to take a step back. So where I always had a problem with remote patient monitoring were the physical devices.
Hmm.
And there's lots of problems with the physical devices. One, just the expense of the device.
Hmm.
Go back to the $100. Second is logistics around a device. So if you're providing people with a device, if you're not doing it in person, you have $15 that you're spending sending this device around one way. So it's
Hmm.
$15 there, $15 back, $15 to the clinic, whatever it is. that just adds up and takes away from the reimbursement that's coming in.
Do you mean like the device sits with me for a while, for a week or whatever, and it gathers all its data, then I have to get it back to my provider so they can download it all? Is that what you mean?
No, no, just on the front end or the back end. But for
Okay.
example, let's say I send out, I send out 10 of these, it's $150 that I've sent out to 10 people.
Hmm.
Well, how many of them are going to use it for more than 2 months?
Mm.
Then I have to have it sent back, or I just have to write it off. Well, that's
Hmm.
$100 write off plus the
Hmm.
15 plus it just starts
Start,
adding up.
yeah.
It's sort of this, it's, you're kind of bleeding from all these little nicks.
Hmm.
So, so, so you have that. Then the biggest issue with remote patient monitoring, and again, this isn't what you asked, but I'm getting
Yeah.
there,
Hmm.
is is patient compliance. And I think that's a term that most people don't like,
It's true.
but I don't know a better term, and I think it describes it well. So I'm a patient that has hypertension, and if I don't take enough readings, which is 16 readings, it's actually 16 days of readings in a month, there's a reimbursement code that's not, you can't be reimbursed for that service. So you have
Mm.
people that are doing all this work,
Hmm.
and the person only measured for 15 days in that month. So you don't get to charge for it. So you're at the mercy of the patient and whether they're compliant or not. And that is, there are, I mean, we could talk for hours on all the reasons why patients aren't going to do that.
Hmm.
And some of them are within their control, some of them aren't. I mean, we look at social determinants of health, and you can go on and on and on and on. And there's a lot of challenges that people have. The last thing they want to do is stick a blood pressure cuff on every day.
Right, but
So
it's a good point. Like if you just step away from the health environment we're talking about here, that's like a bad business model. I mean, how many times do you sign up and say, I'll get paid if you do the 10 things you're supposed to do, but otherwise I get nothing? Approach that one quite cautiously, wouldn't you? I mean, but you know,
yeah, add in the fact that your payer is the federal government,
right,
which I'm not bagging on the federal government. It's, you don't have control. They will tell
correct.
you this year you're taking a 2% cut
Then there's
because we're
that.
cutting all
Yeah.
reimbursements.
Yeah.
So you don't control your pricing really.
Hmm.
Yeah. So yes, when you say bad business model, there's lots of red flags that go up.
Hmm.
So so again, I'm getting there. I
Yeah.
promise you I'm getting there to an answer.
Yeah.
So in my mind, it's device. There's great software that does all these things. It manages it manages the clinical team. They're seeing the data. The doctors are able to say, oh, look at this trend over a period of time. Um, all kinds of good that happens, but the
Hmm.
device is the problem.
Yeah.
That's where there has to be innovation. And the innovations are there,
Okay.
but it's sort of like the economics aren't there yet. So
Okay.
for example, there are patches. I mean, there's multiple groups that have them. There are patches that you can wear.
Hmm.
You wear them for 30 days. They do all kinds of biomarkers, and you can measure all kinds of things, but that may cost $250. Well,
Hmm.
$250 every month doesn't work
Hmm.
when the reimbursement is 125, or it varies, but something like that.
Hmm.
So unfortunately, that's where it needs to go. Or you have something like, a watch,
Hmm.
a smart watch that, and again, a lot of them don't want to go down the path, the watchmakers, because of all the work that has to go into
Yeah.
I mean, you've seen the problems that Apple's had with their watch recently.
Hmm.
So there needs to be something that is taking readings without the patient having to do anything actively.
Hmm.
One of the technologies that I was super excited about, and I don't know where this is right now, but there was a group out of Israel that had a product where, think of it as sort of a lamp that sits next to your desk and
Hmm.
and does all kinds of readings while you're sleeping.
Wow.
So if you that's exciting to me.
Mhm. Because
Now,
it takes the
cost,
human error out of it, right? It takes the human
right.
interaction. Yes.
So patient compliance is guaranteed.
Right.
Now, there are things like CGM. So CGM is a great example, continuous glucose monitoring.
Hmm.
So with continuous glucose monitoring, which more and more people are able to take advantage of that because of some changes in the coding. So it used to be people with that were taking high levels of insulin daily, and that's been reduced. So more
Hmm.
people can take advantage of using CGM. Well, CGM, it's on and it just measures.
Yeah.
There's so the economics of that aren't quite shaking out right for RPM. Um, I'd love to see someone really crack that and knock that out of the park. But I think those are the types of that's what I'm getting excited about.
Okay.
It's measuring its devices that there's groups that are doing all kinds of measurements with your phone. So you take your camera, you put it up to your face, read your face.
Hmm.
We've seen a lot of those, but there are some specific ones where they're able to get blood pressure and all kinds of things just by looking at your face. Now, do I want to sit there for 60 seconds holding my phone in my face and not moving? Not really.
Hmm.
I'm not sure that's any better than a blood pressure cuff, but getting there.
Yeah.
That's getting there.
Yeah.
And there's no device. It's just software. So I can just say download the software. So again, there's little pieces in all of this chain
Yeah.
and it's device. That's where I'm focused on is
And when you say that it's
device.
device, do you mean it's better if there's no device?
Be great if there's no device.
There it is.
Now,
Okay.
there's ways to do that. That's the CMS is opening up to that, which is
Hmm.
exciting.
Yeah.
So we'll go back to the software as a medical device. They have codes that are the remote therapeutic monitoring, which all these are related. RPM is becoming there's tons. There's CCM, RPM, RTM, PCM. There's all these codes that sort of go together. And RTM, which is an alternative to RPM, you can self-report if you're using software that is designated as a medical device.
Okay.
So, but it's used for particular areas. There's an MSK and there's what's the other area? I'm blanking. My apologies.
It's okay.
But for example, if I have chronic pain,
Hmm.
so I could have a pain journal that's using software that is designated as a medical device and could use that. Um, and I would just be saying my pain levels are this today.
Hmm.
So that needs to be explored in my mind a lot more. These are newer, and a lot of groups are starting to do that. Um, but I think that that's really going to be very interesting.
Okay. So, I mean, if I try to boil it down, like, you know, what does it take to be, in your opinion, like, I guess viable, useful, valuable? It's, it's going to gather the data it needs without any patient interaction at all, ideally, right? Despite the patient, it's still getting what it needs. Number one. Number two, it's
Yes.
device free, ideally. And number three, the business side makes sense, right? So it's properly paid for. Like you mentioned the shipping. I mean, I've got a bunch of clients where they need to do a lot of forms for their patients. The administrative burden that surrounds the treatment or the care of a patient just seems to be not really much reimbursed at all, and yet it's a reality. So like the shipping of the devices back, another one, it's like, well, this is real dollars out of the pocket, but CMS doesn't seem to care, not that's the negative way to say it, but it's missed. And it's real time and money. And these all get in the way. They're like barriers to adoption, right? I mean,
They are, and I think that it's easy to bag on CMS. I actually think that they've continued to make a lot of positive changes in this area. I
okay.
really think they have, and I think they've opened up more codes. Reimbursement rates going down never helps. The 16 days of measurements is that's really a tough one that I've never quite understood. Now, I don't have to wear the hat of saying, what about all these people that are going to be committing fraud?
Hmm.
How do we reduce that? I don't have to wear that hat. So
Yeah.
I don't know what goes into all of their thinking.
Hmm.
That's an area that it feels like everyone that's in the delivery of RPM services has been just asking for changes, and there's not been a lot of response. So
Hmm.
again, that would change things quite a bit,
Yeah.
um, if we didn't have to have that. For example, if you are in some type of a, let's say, a weight loss kind of program, so
Hmm.
you have, it's a medical weight loss. Do you need to get on a scale every other day? You just don't. And
Yeah.
actually, that may be a negative for certain people.
Hmm.
There's nothing medical saying you need to do that.
Hmm.
And many doctors will say, look, I don't need to see that many readings from your blood pressure. I need to have a trend, but I don't need
Yeah.
to see, 80 of these between now and the next time I see you.
Yeah.
So that is another way it could change, as CMS sort of opens that up a little bit.
Hmm.
But certainly I keep focusing on device. I keep focusing on it. And
Yeah, these really bother you, it seems.
it does. Well, and the other thing I will say is you start looking at populations in high need of RPM services, and you look at the Medicaid population,
Mhm.
high need.
Mhm.
And how am I going to get what, even if I had software, am I going to give them a phone?
Mhm.
Some people don't have the
Yeah.
phone that they would need for this.
Yeah.
So just the device is such a barrier. How do we get over that? I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I hope we get it all figured out, and
Mhm.
there's lots of smart people thinking about this. And but yeah, device.
Yeah. I just watched the software teams try to make this work when I was at Baxter. I didn't have to do it myself, but I grasped the problem, and it was software sitting in a device. And so it was kind of, the most difficult of both because you had to get the software approved, even if it was sitting in a device, you couldn't group them as one, submit for, FDA approval that way. It had to be separate because they'd be updated at different times. It all made sense why, but it was like a Twin Peaks mountain of, forever. And so I totally get it,
It is.
you
And when
know?
you start talking about things like Bluetooth, and you're in a Medicare population, you're like, does anyone over the age of 65 want to talk to me about Bluetooth and why this isn't connecting?
No,
I don't want to talk about Bluetooth.
no.
So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, it's true. So now, all right, put yourself in the shoes of a private practice owner. You've got a chronic patient population or chronic disease population, whether primarily or at least enough. What do they need to know? Like what independent of the things that is there anything other than the sort of things we've been talking about that they need in order for this to become like a daily reality? Like, one thing I was just thinking of as you were saying this is now if I'm getting 16 reads a month and it's working, at some point I've got to sit down, take some time and, you know, look at that, make a decision about that. Bet that's not getting paid for. Um, or is it? Or, if
It is.
is
It
it?
is.
Okay.
Actually, it
I
is.
was wrong.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. 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 So you're getting me on soapboxes. It's terrible. It's terrible. So I felt, and this was why we created our company, was that if you look in this, we were going after primary care. Primary
Mhm.
care has enough stuff to worry about, and that,
Mhm.
the most important cog in healthcare for in this big wheel of healthcare for people that I think is right there at primary care.
Yeah.
Don't get paid enough, too many hours in a
Mhm.
system that's just grinding them up. So
Mhm.
how do we help them? So our thought was to help them. We do everything. They get the economic benefit and more information so they can better care for their patients. We do all the work. We take the risk. We do the work. So
Mhm.
and I still believe it's a great model.
Mhm.
The that the problem with that model comes in, you start getting a lot of people in the middle of a very little amount of reimbursement. So
Mhm.
it becomes challenging. And the reimbursements are really structured around, I'm a physician, I have my patients, I put them on remote patient monitoring, and I get all of the reimbursement. And that works. So if you can do it, it really works. And there is a significant amount of revenue that can come in that can be used in any way you want.
Mhm. Okay.
More time off, bring more staff in,
Mhm.
fewer patients, whatever you want, which is what I love.
Mhm.
But it does take very, very strict systems. There is great software out there that will, you can ignore all of the information coming in from all of these devices. And then when there's an alert, that's when you have to go into action.
Okay.
Or you're sitting in front of the patient. Hi, Mrs. Smith. I can see that today your blood pressure was elevated, but I see over time it's been fine. So maybe you were just walking across a hot, the hot parking lot or something
Mhm.
today. So the software is there's lots of it. There's great software out there that can do most of that work for you. So it's, do you want to manage devices? There's a lot that goes into that.
Mhm.
And can you have staff that is dedicated to ensuring that you are doing the things you need to do to be able to bill for the codes? You may be putting in an hour's worth of time on a patient, but you didn't do X, Y, and Z, so you charge for zero of that time.
Mhm.
For example, you have to have interactive communication. Well, that's a video call, that's a call. It's not a text message. So, they're little things, and it's very, it's fairly clear. Fairly.
Mhm.
But you have to have very disciplined systems in place in order to do that. And I think once that's done, there is no one better at getting patients to do what they need to do than their physician, right? It's
Mhm.
that magic that the white coat has when a physician says, I need you to take this, I need you to take a reading every day.
Mhm.
Much better chance that that person is going to do it. So I
Right.
think that physicians are in this wonderful position to take advantage of these programs. I
Mhm.
don't think they're probably staffed for it, and I think they can probably use a lot of help. There's plenty of groups out there that can help, but they have to be careful. It's what level of help do they want?
Mhm.
But I think that with the right group, these are great programs, and I believe in they are, from a clinical standpoint, they are helpful.
Okay.
There's
So,
studies, there's all kinds of, but obviously I'm not a doctor, I'm not a
mhm.
physician. I don't know. I can't come from that, but from talking to other physicians, looking at studies that have been done,
Mhm.
I believe in it.
Yeah. So it sounds like, if I, private practice owner X, wanted to really handle my chronic patient population differently and do it with, remote patient monitoring is like in a meaningful way. This is more than just, hey, existing staff necessarily. We're just going to bring this on tomorrow and kind of make it work. No, no, this is different. You might want to talk about some specialized people. The systems maybe have to be created or they're different. It just my take on what you said was this is more than something you sort of bring in on a Monday, and the way in which you do things up until then just kind of, this will fit because it fits the way you've done things. It sounds like there's differences and you should treat it that way. Like if you want to bring this in and offer this to your patients, if you do it right, the economic case works, but there's different requirements that when you see patients, in your office, there's different requirements about from seeing the patient to re-seeing the patient to billing. It just sounds like it's a different sort of flow. Is that right?
It is. I mean, I think of it as, I have a, I decided to bring in a medical weight loss program into
Mhm.
my practice because I
Mhm.
have my patient panel can use this. That's a program. You're bringing
Mhm.
in a program.
Yeah.
You don't just sit there and say, okay,
It's like a new
we're good to
business.
go.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a line of business that you
Hmm.
are putting in, and you have to treat it that way.
Hmm.
And it is, there's work up front, but once that work is done, it becomes part of the workflow. And I think that it can be very successful,
Hmm.
but there has to be that commitment.
Hmm.
And in my mind, if it's working correctly for the primary provider, so think
Hmm.
of the primary provider of medicine at wherever the clinic, their workflow should be enhanced and not impacted in a negative way.
Hmm.
Their staff may need to do different, more, change,
Hmm.
grow,
Hmm.
but I don't believe that there should be a negative from the
Yeah.
primary provider,
Yeah.
which is usually what everything kind of
Yeah.
revolves around.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's
it just
it's
does.
true. It's when
Yeah.
you're right. I go back to like the Baxter days. In any dialysis clinic, there was always hemodialysis, which was when you go into the clinic and you get your treatment. But then home dialysis, peritoneal dialysis, those who did it well treated it just this way. It wasn't just handed to the same staff. There was a dedicated person or people who handled those patients, worked with those patients, because there was different flows, there was different cadences, there was different, you came to everything was different because the nature of the treatment was different. They treated it that way and they promoted it that way, and it was quite successful for them and the patients for whom it qualified. They did well as well. Everybody won, but they didn't. They took it as this is different. You need to treat it that way. So it's a good point. I appreciate the point. Um, I say to a lot of guests, man, we could keep going because I have like five more questions, but I've got to, stick to, we're more bite-sized advice here on Practice Care. So there's a couple of wrap-up questions I ask every guest who comes on. First one is just to be complete. Is there anything you think we should have talked about or anything you think I should have asked you that, that's relevant to this, but I just didn't think to ask you, kind of in the context of what we talked about?
Um, I think the one thing I'd say for your audience is, if you're considering doing this, really do your due diligence on the partner you choose.
Mm,
There is, in any part of healthcare, as anyone that's been in it knows, there often there's always bad actors that follow money.
mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
and we saw some practices that I just felt were not not what I would want. And I think you just have to really find that partner that is the right fit for you and is
Mhm.
doing the things that you need them to do. Um, and so just do your due diligence. I
Okay.
mean, I think, yeah.
Okay. Um, okay, good. And then the other question I ask to wrap up is, all right, the setup is we've caught a listener's attention. They want to get going on this or just start to know it better, but they don't know where to start. It's a new area for them. So do you have any, like a couple of simple practical things they could do to get going down the path of we want to bring this into our practice, or we want to figure out once and for all, is this a good move for us? What would you recommend they start?
Yeah. Yeah. So one of the ways that we always started, which it always came across the wrong way, but it was very practical, was, let's look at your patient panel and figure out who's going to benefit from this.
Mhm.
I think that's the biggest place to start, because if you, for example, you're a 28-year-old physician,
Mhm.
not going to have a lot of Medicare patients.
Mm.
You're in a state that Medicaid doesn't pay for it. I mean, there's all these factors of looking at it, and there's
Yeah.
people that can help with this. But the simple approach is, how many Medicare patients do I have? Because that's going to be the majority,
Mhm.
and that's the easiest, because that payer. Now, private pay does pay for this in certain areas, certain groups, and certain all kinds of stuff. It's complicated, but Medicare pays for it. That's most people with chronic disease, Medicare age, right? I mean, it's just on and on. So
Yeah,
start with
got it.
that.
Yeah. Mhm.
How many patients do you really have that would that you think clinically they they need this, they would
Hmm.
benefit.
Hmm.
And then what kind of the insider information is, I know my panel. I know that Mr. Smith, never going to do it. Never does anything I ask, comes in all the time, isn't going to do it. Mrs. Smith does everything I want. Great. She's perfect.
Hmm.
So understanding how many patients you really have, because if you, I've talked to many doctors where they say, I've got about sort of 10 or 20 I'd like to start with. And I think the economics don't work that well when you don't
Mm.
have sort of some economies, because there's just some upfront money. And if you're going to have someone doing this work, an FTE that you're paying probably need like
Yeah.
100.
I was going to ask, would you say is there like a rule of thumb? Unless you have about this many patients, the numbers are going to
Mm,
get tough. I'm sure it depends
That's
on a
a,
lot of variables, but
it does. One of the problems so as a third party, our economics were different. So we needed more.
mhm.
The reason we needed more, just as a little FYI, was because we knew that X% of people were going to not be successful in some way, shape, or form. Right?
Mhm.
You can take 25% of what people we put on, and they may never even use the device. That's
Mhm.
$100. We're in the hole.
Right.
Boom. So the program has to be spread across enough people where you diversify that risk, right?
Right. Right.
And so you have to think of it as, this is a program, and
Mhm.
it's going to cost us this, and it's going to bring in this, not each person.
Yeah. As a
Because you're going to have
population, right?
people,
Yeah.
yeah, you're going to have people in the red. So
Hmm.
you have to think of it as a population, as a panel. So I think that starting out with, realistically, how many patients am I going to put on this,
Hmm.
it is the place to start.
Okay.
Because if you're thinking 10, 20, you can do it, but
It's very nice of you, but it's probably not gonna. Yeah.
yeah, it's not going to move the needle a whole lot for you from an economic standpoint. I mean, obviously, if it's a zero cost and you feel it's important for patients, then that's a
Sure.
different story.
Right.
But just small numbers. And I also think that it's very easy to onboard a significant number very quickly. It just doesn't take that much.
Hmm.
And so, and billing, it's all sort of a big group. So doing 2 versus 100 is the same amount of work. So you kind of want to think of this as, if I'm going to commit to doing this, I should commit to a significant number that actually moves the needle for us.
Got it.
Yeah.
Cool. Got it. Which makes sense. How many people would actually use this? And you'd mean more than just how many have the disease, how many of them would be compliant, right? So that's because that could be, there's two different numbers. And it's the smaller of the two that you want to go with. You know,
Very much so.
yeah,
Very much so. And it's determined by your commitment to having someone on the phone, calling people, making sure
yeah,
they're doing. I mean, so
yeah,
there's tons of factors there.
yeah.
But you have to be realistic about the number of patients you think are going to be on it for the next year. You sign
Mhm.
them up, they're on it for a year.
There you go. Perfect. Well, thank you for that advice. Thank you for that tip. Thank you for all this information. Very helpful. So yeah, thanks for coming on Practice Care, Drew, and telling us all about it. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it was great talking with you. I really enjoyed it.
Same. And you supplied some contact information for the show notes. And so, which we'll get into the show notes, which means anybody who wants to contact you now has another way to do so. Couple of points before we close out. First, if you're someone like Drew or myself that serves private practice owners in one way or another, or if you're a private practice owner yourself, either way, you've got some experience on the business side of private practice that you think others would benefit from, please, we want you to come on Practice Care and tell everybody about it. In the show notes for Drew's episode and every episode, there's a link, a couple of clicks. It's really quick and easy. Just tell us what's on your mind so we can get you scheduled ASAP. And finally, we're on Apple, we're on Spotify, we're on Amazon, we're on YouTube, we're everywhere. You just have to subscribe so that you can stay up to date with new episodes, which drop every week. So please do so. Just search Practice Care, one word. You'll find us right away. Subscribe, and then you'll be able to stay up to date. Thanks very much, and until next time.